So today's topic, as I said earlier, is really looking at how we might work with metaphor as coaches. And this is a topic that often coaches ask us about. As coaches start to develop their capacity to listen, they might hear more metaphoric language being used by their clients. And I would say as their congruence and their maturity grows, and sometimes they may be inviting metaphors or even offering a metaphor as they've been listening to the client as well. So we will try and make today's session, without any pressure on Liz, as practical as we can. But as I said earlier, please feel free to add any questions into the chat panel as we're working through today's session as well. So Liz, I've known you for a long time now, and obviously I've known about your interest in metaphor and clean language and working with metaphor. So I thought maybe we'd start today by perhaps asking about where's your interest come from as a coach in terms of metaphor.
Yeah, it's a nice place to start actually, because I noticed that when on our courses, actually, when we're inviting someone to think about their coaching philosophy, we're always inviting people to really connect to what are the experiences they bring to coaching and how does that inform their practice and how they work. So I actually came to the work of David Grove, who pioneered clean language, just shortly after I did my first practitioner qualification. And it fell on very sort of fertile soil for me. So I'll say a little bit about David Grove, and then I'll say why it was such fertile soil. So David Grove, who was a counselling psychotherapist, started exploring this back in the 1980s. And he did a lot of work with war veterans. And he noticed a couple of things. So the first thing he noticed was how easily therapists influenced how the clients were sort of understanding and processing things just through the language and the questions that they asked. But he also noticed how increasingly clients use metaphor as a way of trying to describe often their sort of troubled inner experiences, and how the use of metaphor, if they were allowed or if they were given time to explore it, how the use of metaphor and the exploration of it helped the clients to heal. So that was, if you like, his body of work. The reason that I became very interested in it very quickly was more the first point about how easy it is to interpret others. So many people who know me know that I have two boys. My youngest one has very severe autism, and he has always struggled with language. And so as a parent, I had many, many occasions where I observed other people, therapists sometimes, interpreting what Guy was saying, and not really being conscious that that's what they were doing. And I of course was at times quite robustly insisting that actually we had to be very careful that we didn't layer interpretation onto what Guy was saying, that we really should do our best to try and honor what he was saying and to be curious to what it might mean rather than project onto it. So for me, that's why it became such a passion, and it was such fertile ground, and it continues to be a real, Ken, those who know me well, a real passion of mine about being very conscious about not interpreting, or if we're going to be conscious that that's what we're doing. So as you said, it's not that we can't do that, but it's that if we're going to do it, we should really consciously offer it rather than presume it.
Thanks, Liz. I imagine there's people watching now that were sort of, oh, that's why she gave me that feedback around interpreting.
Probably.
That's a joke. So let's just perhaps just unpack a bit about what we mean by a metaphor then. Because again, I appreciate we all assume just picking up on not interpreting then. When you're talking about metaphor, what are you referring to?
Well, so actually I wrote a couple of things down before this, you might not be surprised to hear. So I've got a bit of a mind map in front of me, and I thought that I should have a definition of a metaphor. So a definition of a metaphor is a thing that is regarded as representative or symbolic of something else. So it is when we use something to represent something else. And I suppose a way of sort of thinking about what a metaphor is. So we often talk about the filters that we have as we go through life. We talk about the work of Chris Argyris and the ladder of inference, how the filters that we have on determine what information gets in and how we make sense of it. And of course, we need that, because otherwise we would be overwhelmed with all the information that we have. So just as we filter information that comes in, and there's that lovely expression, I'm not sure who said it, but we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So just as we filter as it comes in, we also need somehow to do that as it comes out. Because if you think about the richness of our memories and our emotions and our experiences, and if you think about the brain and the trillions of neurons and all those sparks and all that activity, we can't possibly find enough words, although my husband would say at times I try, but we can't possibly find enough words to convey that meaning into the outside world. So we use metaphor as a way of communicating depth and richness and complexity in our language to sort of share it with other people. So in essence, that's the sort of, that's what a metaphor is. And it actually comes from the Greek word metaphora, which means quite literally to carry over or to transfer. So it's transferring meaning from inside to the outside world. That's what it means.
Yeah, I mean, as I listen to you sharing that, Liz, I suppose I'm thinking, I suppose at some level we got the coachee sharing with us their narrative, the story, and then I often talk about the underbelly, what's the deeper meaning that's really the coachee is making, and this actually being a way into that deeper meaning, but also, a bit like your example earlier, and why you became so interested. The other bit around, really, I suppose, listening and hearing that metaphor and inviting the coachee to pause and move into more of an inquiry when it could just be naturally noticed and moved on. I suppose there's something about, the impact that has on the coachee as well, in terms of really feeling heard and understood when the coach is sensing and picking up on the metaphors that are being shared.
Yeah, I think the thing I would add is that it's because I think cognitive linguists increasingly, I think, are recognizing that what metaphor it is doing for us, if you like, as human beings, is or how important it is. It does, if you like, support our ability to, if you like, think and process complex things. And so you're absolutely right that what metaphors are doing is representing our experience at a much deeper level. So they are a really important part of our communication, and then therefore in coaching they are a really important clue to how someone might be experiencing something, and they may not be aware of it. Often this will be an unconscious, like a laying down of patterns, so like an inner system really of patterns of thinking that the client often isn't necessarily aware that they're there.
So this is interesting. So just say a bit more then about benefits, because when you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, often this is one way of really supporting my clients to connect more to their emotional knowing, when we start to work with metaphor. So what other benefits would you say are there for coaches and clients, perhaps, for working with metaphor?
Oh, lots and lots. So the thing I will actually start with is there is an idea in NLP, because of course often these things are very connected, that if you take the experience and find the structure and then change the structure, you'll change the experience. And in a way, that's what David Grove observed in his work. So he observed that by enabling someone the space, if you like, to just explore the metaphor, in other words, their metaphoric landscape, it enabled them to heal and process and rebalance without them having to retell or relive the story of it. So it really is that sort of working at a different level. So I think the thing that a couple of other things I would say actually is that, because you alluded to it, is that it also really helps the other person feel heard and understood, because actually by really sort of working with their metaphor, you are staying with how they are experiencing things. So I think it's a little bit like it sometimes gets described as internal mind wandering. I mean, actually, you've got a forest behind you. It's almost just like allowing your client to go wandering through whatever this landscape is and just really exploring what it means for them. It's often like every metaphor has a special place in our mind's eye where it belongs. And it's like a little or big container, repository of inner wisdom and understanding. And often, as I said, we're not necessarily aware of what that is until we're given the chance to actually really sort of let it emerge, if you like. And again, what it's doing, if you like, is fundamentally it's allowing the client to work on the deeper structure of it rather than the problem. You know, we often say, don't we, don't coach the problem, coach the person. By focusing on metaphor, you are sort of focusing on this bit underneath rather than the narrative that can go with it.
And I suppose, you know, there's going to be coaches that are watching this thinking, and I'm sure would he be working with metaphor, but just from what you've learned, Liz, you know, in terms of if there were some key tips that you would be giving coaches around working with metaphor, what would you share?
Oh, what would I share? Well, firstly, have fun with it. Because it can, you know, there can be real richness in it. So I think the first thing I would say is just stay curious and stay non-judgmental to what you're hearing. One of the fascinating things about metaphor is because there are metaphors that have become very much part of our everyday language. And so we use them as shorthand and we assume a level of understanding around them. And the really important thing and that can be helpful in everyday conversations. But the really important thing when you're working with your clients is to suspend any judgment you might have that you understand what that means. So the first thing is just to stay curious. And there are a couple of examples. One is mine and one's yours. So people who've worked with me may have heard this one. I asked a client once a question about something. She said, oh, I've drawn a line in the sand. And I remember thinking, great, you know, that sounds really positive, doesn't it? Because that metaphor can mean generally, or can mean that. And luckily I said, I didn't use a clean question at all. I said something like, that sounds really positive. And she said, oh no, she said, I've drawn it with my finger in the sand and the tide is about to come in and wash it away. And I was like, oh, okay, that's very different. But it's such a lovely example, isn't it? You can see underneath that, wow, there's a repository of more in there. And then the one I know that you shared, Damien, was a senior leader who said in describing the organization, it's like the biggest oil tank you've ever seen. I think you said, where are you? And they said, I'm on a pilot boat trying to get a line on. And again, we might assume that they're on the tanker, but, you know, they weren't. So again, it's really stay curious would be my first thing. Make sure you're not interpreting it. Use the coachee's language. And again, anyone who's been trained by us will definitely have had me pick that up. But I think it's holding this mindset of the coachee is not choosing those words by accident. So stay with especially the bigger words, stay with the coachee's words. And actually, even if they're not using metaphorical language, stay with the words because they've chosen them for a reason. It's one of those, if you're working with metaphor, give it space. You said earlier, it's easy to hear it, and then move on. But actually, because it's unconscious, give it space, let someone really explore this landscape. There's a lovely expression, which is allow the client to breathe life into this metaphor. Let it come to life. The more that the client can really explore it. And so some question, it's one of those areas where actually asking really simple questions is helpful. So what else? And if anyone's interested in clean questions, you can go and have a look at some of the basic ones. But just asking, what color is it? What size is it? What shape is it? What else is around? What's the relationship between this and this? So simple questions, but allow space. Because if you go back to what I said about NLP, if you like, in order for something to transform, it has to have form. And in order for it to have form, the client has to have the chance to really elaborate on this landscape. I had a client once, I still remember this, asked how, she said, I'm feeling really under pressure. And it's easy to think that that's like, weighed down. And I asked her more about it. She said, it's like I'm in a room filled with balloons and they're all, it's so full, I'm completely pressed up against the side of the room and I can't breathe. And so we really played with it, color, size of the balloons, she built this incredible picture. And then I think I said to her, what would you like to have happen? She said, I just need to find a pin. And then off she went. And we had a whole conversation about the pin and where would she find the pin, and she popped one balloon. And again, as a coach, it's easy to think that, what am I doing? But actually, when the client then comes out of that, it's amazing what they take from it in terms of what's fundamentally shifted. And we do a lot of work around embodied work, but what's shifted underneath that actually then, it's like when they come out of it, their cognitive brain will then make sense of what did that all mean. But more importantly, the bit that shifted has shifted and it won't go back. So yeah, it's that real stay curious, use their language, give it time, ask clear questions, simple questions. And you said, don't, I'd say the same. Don't hesitate to offer your own metaphor, because it might be that you're listening to a client's story and you've got a very strong image in your head. So again, as long as it's an offer, can I share something or an image that's coming to my mind? That can be really helpful to then help the client sort of bring it in. If you want from clean language, if you want a question that generates metaphor, it is, and that's like what? Not what's that like, but that's like what, because that invites us a more of an image. I could go on, so I'll stop there.
No, I appreciate it. And just say to the group listening, a number of years ago now, we recorded a webinar on clean language, didn't we? So that's actually on our YouTube channel as well, if people do want to have more of an exploration around that. I can see some comments and questions that are popping up on the chat, so I will try and come back to those if we have time. And I suppose just hearing you talk that again, just reinforcing the importance that the coach is, really listening and reflecting what the coachee is sharing and creating in terms of their frame of reference. Because I was just sitting with the fact that I noticed that would be quite a rupture if someone started, again, like you said, interpreting what I was sharing about the balloons or whatever,
Yeah.
So you've said about, we work embodied. You've said a bit about sort of the exploration. What are some of, I suppose, perhaps more creative ways, Liz, of working with this then?
Yeah, well, there are lots and lots of ways that we can. And interestingly, actually, if you go back to David Grove's work, so he started with clean language, so it's very much a dialogue. And then he noticed in his work with clients that often people's metaphorical landscape includes space, so that we do spatially arrange things. So what the work that he did, he called clean space and emergent knowledge. And one of the core bits of that actually is drawing. So we can invite clients to draw things, and that is a representation. So, and I always laugh when I say to a client, I say, I'm going to invite you to draw it. And I say, it's not about drawing. I think Karen Prentice says mark making.
Yeah, she make them up. But again, having that language is helpful, isn't it? You know, this isn't about an art competition, you know, trying to normalize, because the mark making is just because some people might find it quite challenging if they're given a sort of plain piece of paper, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And again, you know, David Grove would say, and I agree from the work, having worked with it, is, and people don't do it by accident.
Mm.
So underneath what they draw, there is a tremendous amount of meaning. So again, stay with it. I had a client recently drew a stick figure. That doesn't matter. There's something in that that is interesting. Again, it's just allowing it to emerge. So I think recognizing that space is important, and that how that is part of the landscape. So I think drawing can really be a helpful thing. Those who know me well, I'm smiling, will know that objects is one of my favorite things to work with, because an object is a metaphor. And so inviting clients to work with one object or two, and then again, really as the coach, being thoughtful about where they put them. So I'll always say, where do you want to put that? And again, we say, don't we, there are no coincidences.
Mhm.
So objects to help people represent things, and then the physical mapping of those. Even if you do it with post-it notes, again, that's a kind of a symbolic representation. Using a magic box. So I've got my little mini metaphors that I'll often take into conversation. Pictures, of course, picture cards are a form.
So magic box will be a number of small objects that you've got in a box that you take to a coaching session. Yeah.
And you can buy them, but you can also create your own.
Mhm.
You know, go into nature and get lots of different things. Or when my children were younger, I used to go and quietly borrow a few interesting objects and hope they didn't notice, like little figures and things. So I think these are all different ways. And the other one is just, the other thing I'd say about working this way is it's incredibly memorable. So I can still remember a session with a client where face to face, where he said, I'm at a real crossroads. And I just said to him, so if the crossroads was here, where is it? And he leapt out of his chair. And the whole exploration was him standing at the crossroads, walking a bit way down the path, turning around. What does this feel like? And it was just, this was his metaphorical landscape just here. So I think the other thing is we can work with it physically as well. I'm conscious of time, Damien, because a half an hour's whiz.
Yeah, no, I know. And I'm just going to pick up. So seeing your hands do this, the space. I'm going to pick up on Steve's question, because he said, you know, is the use of smile considered in the same context as a metaphor? I just wondered if we could perhaps talk a bit about the non-verbals that might be expressed in the metaphoric language as well.
I think he said, I think actually I'm going to read it again. It's simile. He said, is it a simile rather than
Oh,
a
simile.
metaphor?
Sorry, I saw a smile. Sorry, it's
I
my
know.
eyes. It's my eyes.
Well, I'm not an academic, so I'm not even going to try and tell you the difference between a metaphor and a simile, because there'll be somebody way more qualified than I am to do that. For me, you know, the fundamental thing is just to get really curious about not only the language, but just again how people are representing this experience that they have at a deeper level, whether you call it a metaphor or simile, because it is just a way of representing our experience, emotions, and thoughts it's just representing how we're making sense of those, is what I would say. And the other thing I would say is we can have fun with it. You know, they can have real moments of insight for clients, but also some real moments of levity for people about how they represent things. You know, it can be, yeah. I'm smiling because I can remember some of the strange objects that people have decided to use.
Yeah, boy, where they place them as well.
Yeah.
So if there's one resource you would point to, Liz, and that's putting you on the spot a bit, but if there was something you would say, look, I'd suggest looking at this, what would you say to the coaches listening?
What would I say? I'm shocking at remembering things. There is a lovely book on metaphor, but I can't remember what it is, so I'll have to try and find it. I would say follow your interest. If it piques your interest, maybe read a little bit about David Grove or Clean Language, or I think it's called The Art of Metaphor, something like that. And also just experiment with it. It's a really easy thing to do. Just perhaps try, when you hear a metaphor, just get curious, ask your client about it, but then don't move on. Ask a bit more. So it's like, just take a little bit more time and see what happens. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, and I suppose seeing you talk and that sense of energy that comes from this, I'd really say just trust that as a coach, because again, often we're going to be the one that believes the coachee won't go there if we spend some time unpacking, what they mean by the metaphor that they've shared, but really trusting that with that awareness there come choice, Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Thanks for, I suppose the overview and some of the hints and tips that you've shared, and also some of your personal experiences as well. So we're sort of at time now. So I just want to say to everyone, thanks for joining in. I hope that's been helpful for you as always. As we come towards the end of this conversation, I am just going to point to next month's webinar, and that's going to be with me, and I'm going to be talking about the psychology of impermanence. So hopefully an interesting topic for you to join next month as well, 12th of February at 1 o'clock UK time. So Liz, what would you say just to close this down from your side?
Just thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed having half an hour to talk about metaphors. I hope people have found it helpful.
And thanks everybody for joining. Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.